March 22nd, 21. The mayor and I are attending in person along with several members of the administration. Council, pursuant to our resolution of last meeting, is attending on Teams. Could I ask that you please ensure that your video cameras and microphone are turned off? If a member of the committee wishes to speak, that they enter their name in the chat window and order to be placed in the speaking queue. The mayor and I are attending in person with several members. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone and enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with a recorded vote. Delegations will be attending the meeting through teleconferencing to address the committee on various items of the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the public agenda at the call of the chair?
So moved, Bresciani.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, I declare the public agenda approved. We will begin with the second item, Delegation EX 21-24, Heritage Conservation Policy. We have one delegation. Could I call on Ms. Schmidt from Heritage Regina? Ms. Schmidt, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You know the drill. Could you please state your name, who you represent? You'll have 5 minutes to make a presentation, following which there may be questions from members of the committee. You may go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Schmidt. I'm with Heritage Regina. Members of the Executive Committee, we would like to thank the City Administration for developing a policy that deals with some of the issues Heritage Regina identified with the current Heritage policy. The lack of a maintenance policy for designated buildings and the lack of process for ongoing identification of heritage properties was troublesome. This proposed interim policy addresses these two areas of concern in a manner that Heritage Regina can support. We are also pleased that the city is reviewing its incentives policy and seeking additional and enhanced provisions. No community consultation regarding this policy proposal was undertaken, and the community only heard that administration was in the process of making recommendations via comments made by the administrative staff at recent council meetings. There has been no previous opportunity for Heritage Regina to ask questions or seek clarification on the proposal. So we feel we must lead with the items that we have questions about. Number one, which is why is this an interim policy? If interim, what are the timelines for the evaluation? Number two, what is the plan to communicate to stakeholders regarding the list of properties? What was taken off? What has been put on? Have there been any additions to that policy? Before we can support the assessment of a financial feasibility section of the proposal, we would like to get clarification on the following. Number one, we would like to understand what the writer means when they say the ability of the property owner to invest their share depends on a variety of factors, including their personal financial position, the type of property, and the capacity to generate future income. We do not understand why the capacity to generate future income is a consideration. How does the city propose to assess this? Since when is the city responsible to ensure that a property owner makes money in the future on their investment, whether it be initial investment or investment in the improvement? Number two, there is a risk. We risk a condition assessment resulting maintenance requirements could be a deterrent for those seeking voluntary designation. People may not be interested in participating in a financially viability assessment for privacy reasons. Number three, the proposal does not clearly outline how economic viability will be addressed. It discusses an engineer-led condition assessment, an opinion of the cost for the owner, but fails to identify how the owner's personal financial position will be factored in. How will the city assess the ability of the property owner to pay the minimum accessible level of conservation? How will the opinion of cost for the property owner be factored into the viability assessment, and what weight is given in the overall destination assessment? We support determining a minimum level of conservation and cost, but we cannot support this section on the proposal as it is not clear how financial viability is ultimately established, nor does it indicate the impact of this assessment on the assessment of the property for designation. We'd like to understand why, if best practice recommends that heritage value and the feasibility of rehabilitation be considered separately, why are these two combined? A negative assessment of the feasibility of the rehabilitation or an owner being unable to afford the minimum acceptable level of conservation could lead to historically significant properties being downgraded to a grade 2 in the assessment process. This is what happened in the Bagshaw residence. This creates a situation where the heritage value is considered less significant than the cost of repairs. With demolition, the property and its history are lost to community forever. Even if not demolished, the story of this property will not be told to the community as it does not meet the criteria for designation. Using a financial viability assessment as part of the heritage assessment will lead to more properties being removed from the inventory despite their historic significance. Heritage significance does not change, but ownership and financial viability can. There is no provision for reassessment for properties removed from the inventory based on financial viability. The policy is not clear if the assessment of financial viability will be completed for every property that is on the list, or is it just for those serious concerns about structural integrity? There is no provision under the financial viability section to deal with a situation when an inspection at the time of designation does not identify serious structural issues, yet the property owner disagrees and wants a further inspection. Who would pay for those costs? Without further clarification and an opportunity to consider the response to our questions, Heritage Regina cannot support the assessment of financial feasibility section of this proposal. Heritage Regina would also like to suggest a few other inclusions into this policy, which we feel would make it a more complete policy. One issue identified by property owners and real estate professionals is that the lack of information and understanding of implications and benefits of a property being on the heritage inventory list or being designated. As the city has already embarked on efforts to educate current property owners, Heritage Regina recommends that a process be developed to address changes in ownership. Changes in ownership of a designated property or a property on the inventory list should trigger a notification to the city, and in turn the city reaches out to the new owner to provide information regarding heritage policy, assessment, designation, and the incentives. The following provided should be based on the status of the property, meaning that when it's a designated property, when they would receive a copy of the assessment, information of the inspections, and the results, including outstanding work to be done, the heritage policy, and the incentives program, as well as contact information from the city staff available to assist them. This notification process would ensure ongoing education for property owners on the history and the importance of their property and the value of owning a heritage property, and that would ensure owners are aware of requirements for maintenance and understand what programs are available to assist them. Heritage Regina recognizes not all significant properties can be retained, and demolition will still occur. A program that requires heritage properties, properties that we cannot keep. The program should include a plaque program so that walking tours can include these locations. Private citizens can visit and learn about their heritage properties. This will ensure that the history of our city is not eroded by demolition of heritage properties. And in addition to a plaque program, we recommend a web-based option that includes all the Grade 2 assessed properties, and that all designated properties and all Grade 1 and Grade 2 properties have been demolished. We cannot lose the story of our city's growth and development because of the demolition or because a property does not have citywide significance. Nor can we leave the recognition of the contribution of the city builders, craftspeople, and community builders to the individual homeowners. The city has a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and preserve our heritage, as indicated in page 2 and 3 of this proposed policy. A recognition program for heritage properties accomplishes this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schmidt. There are questions. Councilor Zakidniak.
Sorry. Sorry for that. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Schmidt. I think I only have one question because it appears you were able to finish in time or finish everything you wanted to say. So if that's the case, I think my one question is, if administration were, I see that you have lots of questions, and for you to get some answers to your question, would you be open to the possibility of city administration consulting with Heritage Regina in order to ensure that there's a more fulsome interim policy in place? Would that make sense to you as a potential next step? Through the chair, please.
Through the chair, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Ms. Schmidt, for your presentation. I just have one question regarding the suggestion that there be a trigger when ownership of a home on the heritage inventory changes hands. I think in the case of the Bagshaw residence, when that property changed hands, the intention of the new owners was to demolish and build new. So would you think that that would be sufficient, or would maybe there be disclosure when a house is for sale, some kind of disclosure that it's on the heritage inventory? Through the chair.
Through the chair, two things that would accomplish this. One thing that's proposed in this interim policy, which what we need to have done first is the evaluation of all the homes on the inventory and on the designation list. And that was one of the questions I had, was about like which properties get the assessment. Is it all the properties that are on the inventory and the designation list, or is it just the designation list? And further to this question is that the maintenance program that's established in this interim document would make sure that the Bagshaw residence did not fall into disrepair, because if it was like an evaluation, a third-party evaluation happened, the assessment would have come back that this house needed maintenance, and then a schedule would have been worked up with the homeowner. If the homeowner would not have the ability to pay, the city would have gone in, done the required work, and then there would have been a lien put onto the property so that when that property sold, that cost would have been recouped by the city that they initially paid during the time when this owner had the property. Because I'm concerned that this person probably did not have the ability to pay, but this way the owner stays in the property, the maintenance is done, and then the city covers the costs, and they recoup those when the property is sold.
Okay, thank you. One last question through you, Mr. Chair. Is you mentioned the historic plaque, to have a historic plaque program. I have seen a couple of plaques in front of some of the heritage homes, or in both the Lakeview and Crescents area. Why are you suggesting that we should do that if there already are some that exist?
To you, Mr. Chair, is that the plaque program was discontinued years ago, so there are no plaques on heritage properties. So even though you do designate your property, that plaque program is no longer in existence, and that we think it should be back on the budget to be reestablished.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Stadnichuk. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt, for coming forward. So I just have a question in regards to the financial piece. So when we're looking at the financial viability that's on page 6, I just need clarification, because in your your submission when you spoke, you have a concern with that piece. Can you just elaborate on that? Through the chair.
Through the chair. Those were the items that mainly we talked about in this report that we're not exactly sure about some of the comments made in on page 6 of that document, and that we want to have questions too about the ability of the property owner to invest their share depends on a variety of factors. We're not really we don't really know what that means, what their share is, and that it alludes to some kind of that sense when the city's responsibility to make sure that the property owner makes money on their investment. We don't understand what that is either. And so that's why, and this was all done in isolation, so we don't really know what any of those things mean in this document, and we would like to have further discussion on this.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else through the chair that you would recommend be part of this discussion if it is referred back to include Heritage Regina? Any other stakeholders that you would think that would be important through the chair?
Through the chair, I believe that some of the major historic neighborhoods should be involved in this process, and also I believe the heritage consultant that the city is working with, Donald Luxton, would be good to have on this committee.
Thank you. And the last question, just as you're the head of Heritage Regina, do you know the properties that are on this list, and do you see any that would fall close to the Bagshaw or the Cook residence where they've been dilapidated and kind of nothing has come up through the city for a demolition permit or anything like that? Is there any that you have flagged with city that could be of any concern? That a policy like this, of course, once it's finalized, would help. But are there some red flags out there right now that you're seeing? And have you seen this list of all the homes on the list? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So on page 5, when they're talking about the heritage inventory policy approval, and that there's over 260 some properties on that list, and that they say that they now have it down to 176. That's a red flag because we don't know for sure what has happened with the properties that they've assessed. My questions are, who's doing the assessment? If Donald Luxton and Associates are doing those assessments, which I think they might be doing, but I don't know that either. That makes me feel better because I think we had some major issues when the assessments were done. The Bagshaw assessment was done by another architectural firm that didn't have any history of historical restoration, and that was a concern, and a lot of things were left off of that document. So that concerns me. What did they do with that? This should be an open process, and I think that neighborhood engagement in the what's coming on and what's coming off. And then my other major concern is that the Heritage Holding Bylaw, which was created in 1989, that created this list, the bylaw list, the holding list, which turned into the inventory, and the designation list, nothing has been done with that list for some 40 years. And that we need to reevaluate that list, and that the thematic framework, which was like a rubric, for example, that assesses that until they bring properties and historical sites to use that thematic framework sits on a shelf and it does no one any good. It was a lot of money spent to create an outline and a rubric that will never be used. So it was meant to assess what kind of things we're missing in our community by being designated. For example, I can tell you, because I sat on that committee with Donald Luxton when we created that thematic framework, that the Chinese immigrants had a major impact on the creation of the city of Regina, and that they need to be identified and honored by historical means, and until somebody does that, they will never be identified. So how many other immigrant populations that contributed to the creation of the city are being left out? We don't know that. And so money has to be spent to make sure that happens. So I guess I have kind of spoken around your question of like what properties are being lost. I do know that I live in a very historical property that I'm probably biased, but like one of those people were instrumental in creating the neighborhood of Lakeview, and it was originally on the inventory, and it just fell off, and now it's not on the list. And so I want to know, that concerns me. If that one fell off the list, how many others are not on the list that we don't know about?
Okay, great. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bresciani. Do any of the other committee members have questions? Seeing none, Ms. Schmidt, I have one question that I'd like to ask you, and it's a follow-on, I think, from Councillor Bresciani's questions. In the report, I'm going to read you one sentence, and I'd like you to tell me, if you would, how you understand the meaning of that sentence. It's under the section Assessments to Understand Financial Viability, and the sentence is this: while best practices recommend that heritage value and the feasibility of rehabilitation be considered separately, it is important to consider if it is economically viable to rehabilitate a property while still retaining the heritage value. Could I ask you to comment on your understanding of that sentence, Ms. Schmidt?
Yes, through the chair. So best practices wants you to identify those separately. So for example, if we take that into consideration with the Bagshaw residents, I feel like the Bagshaw residents, they had an end result they wanted to create, which was to keep it at a grade 2 level because they didn't want to designate it. Maybe they knew it wasn't well maintained, but what really should have been done was that it should have been evaluated completely on its historical merits and its value. And then when it comes up as a grade 1 listed property, which I believe it should have been, then you go back and you discuss its economic value and its ability to be able to rehabilitate that. So, but that's what I was talking in my report, because if it's not, you know, I understand that there are going to be properties that we're not going to be able to keep. So if we have to make the tough decision that that house has to be torn down because it's just not structurally sound, then we do that. But then it was graded as a grade 1 property, and it fits into the plaque program because all grade 1 properties would be on the plaque program. Whereas this one went to a grade 2, so it's never the story of Mr. Bagshaw and Mr. Clemershaw, who was the architect, who was internationally known, are never going to be told because it was rated as a grade 2 property. So that's why these two pieces should be done separately, so that you completely, without bias, designate this property for what it was, grade 1 or grade 2, and then you go on to the economic viability of it secondarily.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schmidt. I see that Councillor Findura has a question. Councillor Findura.
I do is trying to work this great technology. It works. Question to you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned about when Bagshaw residents or any other residents are, let's say, evaluated or identified, and you mentioned something about not being evaluated by qualified architects in a heritage, as a heritage, a knowledgeable architect. Is that something that you would strongly recommend, that the prerequisite to have someone that's on the list to be qualified to give an opinion, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Schmidt?
Through the chair, yes, I do, because there were so many things that were missed on the Bagshaw residents, and when we did find them, I feel like administration was not willing to accept that information, and because they wanted to keep it at a grade 2. Don't really know why. And so we need somebody who's qualified to do that. I know that in the last term of people that I was asked if maybe 2 people should do the SOS, the Statement of Significance. I don't know that that's necessarily going to fix the problem. I just think that you need to have one good evaluation that's independent. It also kind of concerns me that the owner of the property paid for that evaluation. That seems to be a conflict in my opinion. But we need a qualified person. Donald Luxton has that ability and has done a lot of these, but we do need to identify someone within probably a closer range, or definitely it would be nice if we had somebody in the city who would do these evaluations, and that these evaluations were transparent, which is what concerns me about this document, that they're now down on page 5 at the top of the page. You'll notice that there's only 176 properties left to remain to be evaluated. So what is the status of what properties did they assess? Like, what were the conditions? Which ones fell off the list? Did they add any? Like, we don't know. It's all been behind closed doors. And in the past, we've had stakeholder engagement, and we've been part of the process, so that when they do these documents, that we can then go out and disseminate that information in the community in a positive way, so we can get neighborhood buy-in for this. And when it doesn't happen that way, it becomes difficult.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ventura. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Jackie, I guess there's 2 parts to this. One is this policy helps to preserve built heritage, but the other part presumably is actually encouraging people to purchase heritage homes and not fear the implications of owning one. So you've advocated for ensuring that we respect built heritage. Here's the policy. How do you think this might take the fear factor out of confronting a heritage home as a potential buyer? Does this alleviate the cost, the risk, having this assessment done and these policies in place?
Through the chair, I believe having this maintenance policy in effect and this third-party review is a benefit. You're buying a property that has a built-in maintenance program already established, and the city is taking the cost for the initial third-party evaluation. Like, when can you buy a property and someone's done the evaluation for you for free, and you believe in the assessment that is being done, and that if we have a fulsome discussion with owners as they buy these properties, and we present this in a very positive way, and we tell them about the incentives program, and I'm encouraged that they're going to have other parts of this incentives program that they're going to institute. I don't know what those are at the moment. That's another question I would have. That these are all going to be benefits, because there are a lot of communities that it's a great honor to own a historical property. And I would like to see the city of Regina be one of those areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I see no further questions. Thank you, Ms. Schmidt, for your contribution. You may leave the meeting. If I can get a member of the committee to move the recommendation, I'll call on Ms. Harlock to introduce the report. Councillor Stadnischek, are you? It's a kidney hack. Are you prepared to move the recommendation?
Well, I actually have a referral motion, so does that mean I shouldn't?
You can move the recommendation. I will ask Ms. Harlock to introduce the report. You then get to speak first to the recommendation, and as part of your speech, if you wish to move a referral motion, you're free to do that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Can you move, I take it then that you're moving the recommendation?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Harlock, can you introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So tonight what we have before you is some recommendations for some interim policy recommendations with respect to how we deal with heritage policies. So the first is to introduce a third-party review process for the heritage evaluations that are done with respect to impact assessments by qualified heritage consultants or architects. Some of the things that we've been observing is just ensuring that there is that ability to have that third party look at those assessments to ensure that the grading is appropriate. The second recommendation is to process of condition of costs. What we saw in the last two applications where council was going to designate the property is discrepancies between costs came in. This is only a policy to give council some additional information to ensure that we have that information for council. In no way does it have any impact on the grading of the property. It's additional information that would be done. The grading is always done separately, and that's under our policy for grade 1 or 2. This other information will help alleviate those issues where you have discrepancies like the Cook residence. If you'll recall, there was 2 different reports that came in with different costs. This will give council the opportunity to have a cost come in that's reviewed and is not to seem to be biased, but as just information. Because as we know, when the bag shot came in, the costs were quite great to rehabilitate it, and it was decided not to proceed with it. So that is just to provide additional information. To Ms. Schmidt's comments, that process was not to evaluate. We are going through a full heritage review, and there is going to be a full consultation process. So to all of the concerns that Ms. Schmidt brought up, those are all going to be addressed through the consultation process. We've hired Mr. Lexton. We're going to start our consultation. The heritage communities are all going to be consulted. Heritage Regina will be consulted. We'll be doing the full consultation about all of these issues with respect to the incentive programs and to whether or not the costing reports need to have anything additional recommendations to council. So that is that. We would like to also ask to inspect visual inspections of all exteriors of designated heritage properties. We don't do that currently, and we need to have the policy in place to be able to move forward with that. And then to approve changes to the building and development permit process to flag demolition applications for properties built prior to 1940. Just to have a screening process right now, because it is going to take some time to evaluate in all of these neighborhoods additional properties. Right now we have the inventory policy to which we are looking. We have done 50 properties. Donald Luxton did that. He did the SOS. And he also did the grading of those, and we need to bring that forward to council for a discussion about what to do with that information now. So that is forthcoming, and there will be a process to continue on that. That was what was approved by council. We could only do so many every year. And then during this process, we'll also look at how to add properties on. So that's part of this additional consultation. It was brought up at the policy review, but we need to have a formal process on how to evaluate other properties to get on. So that will be part of that larger consultation process. And then of course, we're asking within the recommendations for to include cost recovery for the third party reviews and the heritage impact assessments as reported as outlined in the report. So just to clarify, because if it wasn't clear, I get from the conversation, it might not have been clear. The cost assessments are just to provide information to council. It's not used for the grading or assessment. It's just that if we have a discrepancy between people, then at least we'll have the ability to actually get that information for council. Just as note for the bag shot, the applicants only paid for the statements of significance, so they did have that. The grading was done internally, and it was reviewed by 3 people. And then when it went to the Heritage Review Board, the Heritage Review Board did concur that the assessment rating was accurate. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. So we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harlock. I'm going to ask Ms. Zakidniak if she has any questions or any comments, and then I'll put the floor open to other committee members. Ms. Zakidniak.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to, I think I'm just going to jump into the referral motion that I plan to make. And I know that Ms. Ackerman has a copy of that I don't know if that helps to display it for anyone on Teams, but those in the chamber can at least see it. So I will read that, and then I will explain my thinking behind that. Sorry, I'm just needing to pull it up on my own computer here. So my referral motion is, there we go, that this report be referred back to administration for consultation with Heritage Regina and other key stakeholders as identified by administration, with a report back to City Council by Q2 of 2021. I guess I do have a question for administration about that. Regarding
Councilor Zakidniak?
Yeah.
The normal practice is that the regular practice is that referral motions are non-debatable. We have a practice in this committee of asking whether we can refer this to the end of the process where all councillors have had a chance to speak, and have you move it at that time. In the meantime, you have the floor, though. You could address any questions you want. So my question to you is, do you have any objection if we hold this referral motion back down until all committee members have had a chance to speak?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Some of the questions I have questions about the motion because I'm willing to adjust it to whatever makes the timeline for administration. So that's the questions, like if Q2 makes sense. And the comments that I have, I think, are specific to this referral motion. So if later makes more sense for me to speak, then that's fine with me.
I would ask that you go ahead with your questions and your comments, and we'll simply put the referral motion after everyone's had a chance to have their say. So you may go ahead with your questions and your comments.
Okay, sorry, I didn't understand. Okay, so then my questions for administration then are, so the reason I put Heritage Regina because they obviously are an interested stakeholder, and in terms of other key stakeholders as identified by administration, I think that I'm willing to hear from, because this is an interim policy, which stakeholders, additional stakeholders, administration would want to engage with for this interim policy. And then the Q2 of 2021, that is flexible in my opinion, like based on what makes sense for administration. The reason I put Q2 is because it is an interim policy, but I'd be willing to, if administration would like a different date, I'm open to that. So I guess I'm now asking through the chair for the thoughts from administration if this is feasible.
Ms. Harlock.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So our recommendation would be that council just refer all of these issues to the process, because we're bringing a full report and consultation in Q3. The reason we're bringing this forward today is because of the challenges that we have experienced with the cookhouse and the bag shop. That's why we're bringing these forward, because council and administration both struggled with having conflicting engineering reports come forward. This, for us, would give us the ability that in between now and when the Q3 report comes forward, the ability to actually ask for a third-party engineering review. This gives us the opportunity to do all of these things right now, like visual inspections, setting up, excuse me, just some processes for condition assessments, etc. So if it is, if council wants to refer it, then what I would say is just refer all of these issues to our consultation process, and then we'll just do that, and we'll just bring the fulsome report with the full policy, because our plan is to consult all of those groups. We just thought that this would help us for the interim in case something comes forward in between now and that final policy.
Okay.
Mr. Kidniak.
Okay, thanks. So just to check my understanding, I think what you're saying here is either we have an interim policy, and this is like, you know, from your perspective, the best effort at an interim policy, or if it needs to be referred back, then we may as well just not have an interim policy and roll out the larger policy as planned in Q3. Is that accurate? Through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And the risks would be that if an application comes in between now and that report coming in Q3, that we just wouldn't have these opportunities to address some of the issues that we came across with the cookhouse and bag shell.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Kidniak? Councillor Stefaniak, I'm sorry.
Okay, so in that scenario, I'm actually fine with withdrawing this because I prefer an incomplete interim policy than none at all. So that's where I don't think I have anything else to say. I think I'm fine with just withdrawing my referral.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you through the chair. That was my question. I don't think there was a need for a referral, just to understand that I think Ms. Howard, like you indicated, this work is going to be done anyway. And there will be consultations with all of those stakeholders that we heard from Ms. Schmidt. But you had indicated Q3. On page 2, it says Q4 2021. Can I get clarity on that through the chair?
Ms. Harlech?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. I did err. It is Q4. The plan is to come in October. I apologize for my term on the Qs. It is Q4 in October.
Okay, thank you. And just I am interested to know the 200 properties that were in there, and now we're down to 176 properties. What happened to those other almost 25 properties or 24 properties? Through the chair.
Ms. Harlech?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we have 176 to be evaluated. So I might ask Ms. Hill to go through the inventory and the numbers and what we've evaluated thus far.
Ms. Hill?
Thanks. Through the chair. Yes, so the number of properties that's on the inventory hasn't changed. So the only way that a property can be removed from the inventory is through council decision, either to move to designate the property or to remove it to allow other changes like demolition to take place. And so that happens through council decision only. And so the tracking that Ms. Schmidt had referred to is specifically on sort of our countdown around the number of properties that remain to be evaluated. So there's 176 still to be evaluated over the next several years as we work through that work plan.
Thank you. Through the chair, can I just ask, so the timeline for engagement with these organizations, that one we've heard from today, when will that start? Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So our plan is to have engagement with council in April, and then we would proceed to have our work plan rolled out to have our engagement with the different stakeholder groups. So I might ask Ms. Hill if she has the details around the expected timelines that they could expect to have us contact them.
Ms. Hill?
Through the chair, I don't have anything to add. We're looking at a variety of engagement processes or engagement tactics through that time that will include anticipated of our Be Heard tool on the Regina.ca platform, as well as surveys, and then direct stakeholder conversations with groups like Heritage Regina. And yes, it will be initiated in May, ideally after we've had a chance to engage with council.
Thank you. I did hear from the delegation that they also wanted to have historic neighborhoods as well as heritage consultants. Will they also be part of that, those discussions as well, through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, with our consultation process, there would be targeted and then wider open calls for input. But I might ask Ms. Hill to go through the details of the list of stakeholders.
Ms. Hill?
Through the chair, the process is being led by Luxton and Associates. So we've engaged at that level a noted expert in heritage conservation and architecture who's led these processes before in other communities and has been advising us on an ongoing basis on our policies and processes here. The other stakeholders that we would anticipate engaging would be property owners, both designated and on the inventory, real estate professionals, and yes, other professionals that are engaged in heritage conservation in Regina. It can be at times a fairly short list of folks, and we often do have to engage professionals from outside of the city, but it's an issue that that the community here is working to address to try to build additional expertise and so on.
Okay, good. That's all I have. Thank you for the interim policy, and I'm satisfied as we know that the conversations will start here shortly in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair, I understand if my question's out of order, if you don't want it to be answered, but I just have a question for the future problems with heritage. I noticed in this report that properties built before 1940 are up for heritage designation. They're the ones that are applicable. This policy was written in the 80s when these houses were 40 years old, and we're now 40 years later, and we have a gap between 1940 and 1980. What does this mean overall for heritage in Regina? Are properties built after 1940 no longer heritage properties? Is this a standard throughout the world, or is this a problem we're facing down the barrel of?
Thank you. Ms. Harlock.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we just chose 1940 as a date because we needed to have a cutoff date to flag in our systems. Through our consultation process, we'll have those conversations about how do you bring other properties on. This was just a quick flagging mechanism for properties that may have heritage value. We totally agree, and as Ms. Schmidt said, you know, we have our heritage policy and the cultural map, and about it's not just about physical. There's landscapes that we have to identify and all those other things. So that'll be part of the process when we consult about how do we bring other properties on that aren't just in the 40s or 30s, that could be in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Thank you. I was just wondering where that was leading to in the future. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So through the chair, I have a question regarding the capacity of the city to continue doing the heritage evaluations. So the inventory was put in place in 2018, I believe, and there were 200 properties on it. 176 remain to be evaluated. So that sounds like only 24 were done in a 2-year period. I'm not sure what the time frame was. And there's quite a lot more that you want to do. So I'm just sort of wondering about the capacity, or is it through the, like I know the external engineers are going to be playing a certain role, but do you have the capacity to do it, I guess is the question.
Ms. Harlock.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we do have Mr. Luxon has been doing some of it, the evaluation. So I might ask Ms. Hill to go through the process of what's happened since the policy was approved, what we've been working on, and kind of the process of what Mr. Luxton is doing, because he's doing a couple things. He's consulting on the policy, but he's also helping us with the evaluations as well. So I might ask Ms. Hill to just go more in detail about that process.
Ms. Hill.
Through the chair. So I'll just run down sort of where we're at with the numbers on the heritage inventory since the policy was approved. So the initial number of properties on the inventory was 227. That list included some properties that had been designated already. And so when we did a cleanup of the list, we removed those properties that were already designated. And so that left us with 208 properties, of which I'm not going to be able to do this math quickly. 32, I think, have been evaluated so far, and then there's 176 left. So, some of that overlaps because, Donald Luxton would have done some evaluations. Some of those evaluations went through to designation over that period of time. And he also did a number of evaluations on properties that were already designated but didn't have enough sufficient information on them to be able to appropriately conserve them. So there was a lot of work that happened in 2017 and 2018 to sort of clean up the list. Now we're working with Luxton and his associates on a work plan we're trying to tackle about 40 properties a year. So far, the cost is around $50,000 per set of 40, and so we have one set underway right now, and we're looking at if resources allow, potentially moving forward with an additional 40 this year, or at least advancing past this first group of 40 this year. So hopefully that makes sense and clarifies where we're at.
Okay, yes, thank you. To you, Deputy Mayor, so there was also a reference on page 7 to the City of Saskatoon does annual routine inspections of their heritage properties. Do we have the staff resources to do that right now? Because there was a recommendation to maybe go that route. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Administration.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we will, after the review in the policy, bring back recommendations regarding staff capacity. As you can see, we have a number of more properties than the City of Saskatoon, and they do have dedicated resources. So I think it's something that we're going to have to consider as we move forward, and we'll bring that forward when we bring the full policy forward.
Okay, thank you. And just my last question is just when I was going through the report, I was having a bit trying to understand how the building and development permit process would be a trigger. So I don't understand the process, and I hope this won't be a long answer, but how is that a trigger for this heritage inventory to assess, to identify properties that could be part of the heritage list?
Ms. Harlan.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So in our new software, what would get flagged is just the year the building was built. So that gets brought up during the process. So all it will do is it'll flag, and then it will go over to Ms. Hill's area to look at the property and to do a quick assessment of whether or not we need to actually go through the full assessment. It's just that, as I had indicated to Councillor Mancinelli, we picked 1940 as the cutoff. It could be different if council wanted. We just felt that that was a fair number to start with. And then as we go through the policy review, we'll bring different recommendations forward to council.
Well, good. Thank you. That was an easy answer and not a long, complicated one about the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stadnicchuk. Councillor Shaw, you're next on my list. Councillor Shaw?
Sorry, I'm here. I don't really have a question. I mean, just maybe a follow-up from what was just spoken with through the chair. We talk about the heritage properties and going through all this stuff, and we're comparing it to Saskatoon, and like I said, we have 43 in Saskatoon, and over 200 properties are on the heritage inventory list. Do we really have the capacity to do all of these, to do all this through the chair?
The administration.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as indicated on page 7, is that currently the city has 103 designated properties. What we have is the the number that you're hearing before are the ones that are on the inventory, which have potential that we have to review. So definitely when we go down this route, if we go down to the inspecting and evaluating of our designated properties, there'll definitely be resourcing implications in order to ensure that that work can be done.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no further question. Oh, Councilor Bresciani.
Sorry, just one follow-up through the chair. Just for administration, are we going to check with other municipalities to see how they have done this? Maybe it would be, cost efficient as well to see kind of some of the processes, because again, it could be very costly to the city staff. Is that something that will be considered in all of this, or have we already done that, or why reinvent the wheel if there's policies and other things in place through other municipalities? Will that be part of it? Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, definitely. We've done research on what other municipalities are doing with respect to leading practices around heritage. And that's part of the conversation that we want to have with council and the community as we move forward. As far as the staffing to inspect, there's definitely different ways that we could do that. But I think what we've been challenged with is just with the changes and the designation of properties, it's the questions about maintenance, like ongoing maintenance, and how do we ensure that ongoing maintenance is happening to our designated properties. This is where we need to change how we're doing our processes to ensure that our designated properties are in fact being kept up. And I think it becomes more of a question when someone comes in and designates their property, they want it designated. I think it's the challenges that we faced is when we're designating something perhaps where the landowner or property owner is not supportive of it, and how do we ensure that that's happening, that the maintenance is happening.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bresciani. Councilor Mancinelli.
Thank you. Is administration aware of any municipalities that might set a budget for what they're allotted to spend on heritage and then determine the significance for how much it carries towards which properties get a piece of that budget? I kind of follow along Councillor Shaw's thoughts with the capacity we have to service all of these heritage properties and to do the job well. Thank you. Any comments?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I might start and then ask Ms. Hill, but I would say that it goes to what Ms. Schmidt says. It becomes a question about the grading and the value of the heritage and then the policies upon which we would designate those. And then after that, it's if it falls into that category, then we would follow through with the designation, and after that, costs are different. It's the incentive programs that council has opportunities to set limits to. So right now we have a budget of $30,000 in the budget. We could go up to 50 though for capital improvements of already designated properties, and that would come on a first come first served basis. So again, that's one way that council could limit how much incentive. So those are all going to be looked at, the incentive programs and the costs as we move forward. But definitely when we look at the evaluations and the grading, that would be some of the criteria upon which council would look at when would we designate properties.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions. I want to note a technical matter. The recommendations, section 7 was moved, approved these recommendations at its meeting on March 24th, 2021. That should now read, approve these recommendations at council's meeting on March 31, 2021. With that, there are no further questions. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Zahidniak, please.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Councillor Mole.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Carries unanimously. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Clerk. We'll now move to EX 21-22, City Center Core Partnership Framework and Action Plan. and I'll call on the city manager and Diana Harlock with a PowerPoint presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to provide a presentation to committee and obviously to any members of the public that are watching this evening. I wanted to start by just addressing the title of the presentation and the report. So you'll hear many times us talk about districts or district plans, and the working group that was established really struggled to find an appropriate name that also would lessen confusion with other organizations or other terms. So a district often refers to a business improvement district, and we have two in Regina, of course, the warehouse and the downtown. And city center is an area that's defined in our OCP in the growth map, which is growth plan, which is a map attached to the appendix. So the working group really wanted to distinguish the partner land as a section of the defined city center. So we landed with City Center Core Partnership Framework and Action Plan, and it refers to the 6 land areas that currently make up this partnership framework, that being the real lands, the Regina Downtown Warehouse Improvement District, and the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District, the Taylor Field lands, and the yards, and it also includes the integration of the Sask Drive Corridor project. So we're hoping that that title will distinguish this guiding document from any other references that we have. So just a little bit of the background. So on January 29th, 2020, Council directed administration to collaborate with REAL, the RD bid, and the RW bid, respecting the advancement of a city center district. So there's that language again, city center district. The direction was to return with an implementation plan in Q2 of 2020, with terms of reference to engage a consultant on a full plan that would provide guidance and direction and development and create connectivity between the land areas. This framework and action plan is intended to help council understand trade-offs and help with decision making. And strategic investment is needed now more than ever with our current reality. So there's a number of factors that have contributed to the pace of development, particularly in our city center. A key barrier includes infrastructure, and we have some infrastructure that's either near the end of its useful life or it's at the limit of its capacity. And of course, we'd have some slowed economic growth. And we had a downturn in our economy even before the pandemic. So just want to note that, with committee approval and ultimately council approval of this framework, that does not mean that this will advance developments or in any way be approval of a budget. Each application or initiative will have to go through the development or the budget process. And in the case of budget, it'll be important that all developments, all projects are considered against competing priorities. And with that, Ms. Harlock is going to walk through some of the details of the framework.
Thank you. So as directed by council, we created a working group that included Judith Verisek from the downtown bid, Lisa Gibbons from the warehouse bid, Tim Reed from Real, Shauna Bisdell from City Land and Real Estate, and Karen Gazmo from Sustainable Infrastructure, along with myself and Michelle Foreman. So this map on the screen represents the land areas represented in the framework. So it can be found in the back of Appendix A, labeled Map 2. It should be noted that if there is a desire in the future to add more partners to this framework, that is an option. It's just we needed to start somewhere, and this was council's direction for how we move forward. So the process that we took is in Q1 of 2020, we hired a local consultant, Tracy Backley, to facilitate workshops for the development of guiding principles for the partners to adopt and a terms of reference. These would have been the basis for our report to council and committee when asked to bring the RFP to engage a consultant to develop a district plan. This contract moved forward, and although we couldn't have personal workshops because of COVID, the group did work together online, and we confirmed the content that has been developed based on one-on-one interviews and emails. And we determined that just with a few more conversations, we could actually develop a plan ourselves and speed up the process of developing a plan that was quicker than what was originally anticipated. So the objectives that we came up with first was to determine what we needed, and it was about looking at the character of the areas within the framework and the allowable land uses within the framework. The allowable land uses was one of the key drivers, if council recall, for those who were on council at the time, for us to find compatibility between these land areas. We also looked at how can we improve the public realm, including our infrastructure, transportation, connectivity, and streetscapes. We needed to look at amending and updating bylaws and other design guidelines to enable the implementation of the plan. And we also wanted to look at collaboration for marketing the land areas and coordinating our investments. So the framework also was to provide the ability to be a conflict management framework and a partnership agreement with collective strategic alignment, and a succinct document that was user-friendly and practical to meet the needs of our core area of the city. So we wanted to have a document that was joint ownership and championed by all partners, and action focused with strategic target development and performance monitoring measures. So the proposed framework, City Centre Partnership Framework and Action Plan, contains a vision for the land areas as a collective, primary land and event uses by land area, and principles for activation adopted by the organization, as well as goals and recommended policies and actions. So the vision that resonated with everybody was the word great when defining the vision for the city centre core. In the vision for the city centre core, each land area aligns in a cohesive way to build areas that are great places for living, working, and visiting. The vision for the city centre core is to be a model for four-season and mid-sized cities in Canada and the globe, the heart and hub, alive, healthy, safe, strong, and resilient if planned purposefully. Sustainability is a given for these land areas with architecturally pleasing and connected design, so it's a great place for investment. On page 9 and 10 of the document, the vision for the city centre core land areas includes delivering great places to inspire a sense of belonging, connectivity, togetherness, pride, and opportunity. This will be a purposefully assembly of great places cohesively planned and seamlessly connected to enrich the lives of all who visit and call Regina home. So as indicated, part of the framework was to create goals that I just want to put out here is in no particular order because they're all important. But the first goal was to prioritize city centre development for intensification. This is one of the goals of councils in our official community plan, and prioritizing the areas for intensification guides decision making for a focused effort and investment of taxpayer dollars. Policies and actions recommended for this goal include proposing the development of an incentive policy for intensification in the city centre, that the OCP growth map be amended to include real lands within the city centre, and because they have a significant impact in our city centre core. Goal number 2 was investing in infrastructure to support the city centre core development. Infrastructure needs in the city centre core areas require prioritization and strategic investment in order to give developers the information they need to evaluate opportunities and take advantage of funding from other levels of government. The greatest gap in knowledge or investments are in wastewater, including stormwater, followed by water, then roads. So underground solutions for servicing would ideally be known prior to road work in order to prevent rework. So we are addressing this through the servicing agreement fee policy. The developers have agreed to fund 3 positions to address trying to analyze our infrastructure gaps, and this is one of the key areas that we will do work. A lot of our infrastructure is at the end of its useful life and its limits on capacity, and we've deferred maintenance. So we have to look at all of this, look at what upgrades are needed, rehabilitation and replacement in order to see this area thrive. Goal number 3 was about connectivity, connect land areas within the city centre core. Connectivity between the partner land areas is very important to create a sense of place, and to create multimodal transportation, and that's a vision for this area. This goal ensures that development is complementary and that each land area has its unique characteristics, but it's a unified city center core. So in saying that, as I indicated before, the key land uses and events by land area was important to have a discussion to bring before council. This is found on page 17 and 18 in the framework. So the key land uses and events by area, the working group classified each land use and event by core, by core, context, and non-core. This allowed us to look at what should go in each of the areas, and it was agreed to with criteria. And this is, as I indicated, one of the key deliverables council asked for. It will guide the partners as they develop their plans, but it will also help our planning department when applications come forward. Obviously, through this process, though, if there is changes, the idea would be that we would have discussions with the core partnership to see if changes needed to be made to the key land uses and events. Because this is a living document, we'll be able to do that. And one of the key things that I'll talk about in a moment is the advisory committee that can help us through that process. So one of the things, again, was principles for activation within the city center core. It was important for the success of this plan to have ideas and principles around where we would see different events and activation. So we worked collectively rather than compete, and seeing the different perspectives and opportunities for land areas in order to succeed as a partnership. So those are found on page 18 and 19. It's important that as we move forward with activation and coming out of COVID, that we have clear ideas on where we can see things happen. So on page 19, it is also talked about, and on page 20 is the concept of creating an advisory committee. So the framework recommends that council approve an advisory committee of council to be created within 6 months approval of this framework. A terms of reference will be developed and brought back to council for approval. The mandate of the committee will be to align the priorities of the partners, guide collaborative negotiations and solutions, and advise council through a main committee on recommended approaches for the advancement and improvement of the city centre core. The committee will act in an advisory capacity and be primarily responsible for the interpretation, authorization of this framework and action plan, and advancing the advisory and collaboration needs of the organizations as the policies and actions are implemented. It'll be the group that takes any discussions, and if there's any disagreements, it's envisioned that this group will work through those before coming to council. So I'll turn it back over to Mr. Holden.
Thanks, Diana, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I don't want to be repetitive. There's a quick review of the framework objectives on the screen. I think it's really important to reinforce that this framework has been approved by the boards of the RD bid, the warehouse bid, and REAL. And I think it's important for council to consider this in context of, the fact that the key land uses and events have been documented in the framework. This is a great starting point for conversations with the advisory committee. Recently in the media, there has been conversations about potentially a new baseball field in Regina. There's been conversations about potentially the need for a new indoor arena, a multi-purpose facility. Those kinds of conversations would go to the advisory committee for discussion. And then there would be a full conversation coming to council to consider those types of facilities it might be for, implementation, budget consideration. It might be for further review. So it's really important that the framework just provides, the guidelines or the parameters around which this advisory committee and ultimately council through the administration can look at opportunities and prioritize those opportunities in terms of what's the most appropriate location. And, obviously always it's important to consider costs. So with that, Diana and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Is that we've got 3 delegations ready I'd like to invite them in. They're here to answer questions. When we're done with those questions, I'll get someone to put this on the floor, and at that point, committee members can ask the administration questions or make comments. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Chair, so we have Tim Reed with Real, we have Lisa Gibbons with the warehouse, and unfortunately, we had to flip, and we've lost Judith. She had another commitment. So Lisa Gibbons and Tim Reed are available to answer any questions council may have.
So, Mr. Reed and Ms. Gibbons, are you there?
I am, thank you.
I am.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite committee members to ask you any questions that they might have about the report, whose name is very long. I think I'm starting with Councillor Zakidniak.
Yes, thank you. I already spoke to Mr. Reed about this question, so maybe this one will just be for Ms. Gibbons. But first I want to say that the partnership framework looks great. I'm really excited about this work and the potential that can happen when all of these folks are working together. So really excited about this process. The suggestion that I had given to Mr. Reed, which I believe, and he can confirm that he was open to as a member of this partnership, was it's on page, so on the report, it's page 10. In our meeting package, it's page 12. But there's a box that talks about city center core characteristics. So in general, a lot of those are aligned with our city vision. But so I saw talk of vibrant, inclusive. While I didn't see the word attractive in there, to me, everything in there hints at an attractive community. What I did suggest is more clarity with the term sustainability. So just because sustainability can mean so many things, and it's okay if it does here, but I think that I would like to see, due to our commitment to be a sustainable community in our city vision and our commitment to be 100% renewable by 2050, a clear explanation or just a clear statement in there about environmental sustainability as a core characteristic for the city center. So Mr. Reed, I believe you had said that you were open to that feedback. So maybe if you can confirm that first.
Good question, Mr. Reed, on sustainability.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I believe that was the intent of the document, but as the councillor suggests, perhaps it wasn't as clear as it could have been. So very open to it and full support for the suggestion.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Hawkins, if I cut you off. I was just also wanting for Ms. Gibbons, does that suggestion, does that sound okay to you as well? Through the chair, please.
Ms. Gibbons?
I would agree with Mr. Reed. We definitely had that talkative conversation and would be open to clarity in the wording.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Mr. Zakidniak. Councillor Zakidniak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for coming forward and answering questions. So just in regards to the process, first of all, we've heard from administration that the land use, and this is just this is a bit of a framework to get started. So where would you see that if a baseball facility, stadium 3,500 plus, where would you see that fit in the land use, and what would be the process for that if this passes? How would it fit in here? How would that process work? I need to know that first, through the chair.
Mr. Reed, Ms. Gibbons, how does the process work?
Ms. Gibbons, would you like to take this, or would you like me to
I was going to
share our interpretation?
No pun intended.
Through the chair, and perhaps I can share my interpretation of how this process would work and just confirm it with your administration. But probably the best example, I think, is on page 17 of the document, Mr. Chair, where it outlines a number of potential uses And I know there's a laundry list of items there, but I would probably draw the attention of council to the first page, about 8 or 9 items down where it says stadium. I believe, and would confirm this with Ms. Horlick, that I believe the intent for stadium was anything from a baseball stadium to a soccer stadium to a cricket stadium, or anything that might be considered that would be some form of a traditional stadium concept. If I was to review that, I would suggest that this document says it does not belong in the downtown business improvement district. It should be considered in the yards. It may be considered in another jurisdiction within the warehouse district. It will not be considered on SAS Corridor Drive, although that would make for interesting driving. It should not be considered at Taylor Field, and it should be considered at the Real Lands. And so my interpretation would be that the committee would ultimately work with administration and the interested parties to explore the yards, the warehouse district, or the Real Lands for the development of a mid-sized stadium for a baseball purpose or otherwise.
Okay.
Ms. Gibbons, I may just confirm that that's reasonable to you, and Ms. Horlick, that that's your interpretation, but that's how we would see it on behalf of Real.
Ms. Gibbons?
Yes, can you get a home run on that one?
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Horlick, can you confirm that from your perspective?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you very much. Councilor Bresciani.
Thank you for that. I would also like to ask about the festival. We've got small festival, medium, and large, and in the Taylor Fields lands, it's non-core. So can you just elaborate there as to the purpose of if it's, what is deemed a small festival? What is the amount there for a small festival? Through the chair.
Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Reid. Perhaps I can just share some thoughts on that, and perhaps Ms. Gibbons and administration confirm. I think the intent of this was to make sure that we weren't competing with ourselves. One of the learnings for this exercise, I believe, was the fact that the last thing that we want to do is compete with ourselves when promoters or festival programmers come to our community. And so the intent of it was, I believe, a small festival was essentially anything in that 1,000-person range. So this wasn't a gathering for a soccer team or a small gathering. It was intended to be an organized festival. Medium festival was somewhere around that 5,000 range, and I believe that a large festival was anything in the 15,000 person range. I'm going a bit from memory, so I'll just ask perhaps Ms. Gibbons and Ms. Horlick just to confirm that that sounds right. But it was an organized festival, likely a ticketed event, and so it would be different than a community or cultural gathering. It was intended to be an organized festival.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbons.
And I would agree with adding that the other piece we looked at that layered into this was the intended land use for that area, and Taylor Field, as it currently stands, is leaning towards residential.
Thank you, Ms. Horlick, on this.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. It was, just as Mr. Reid said, it was the gradation and then looking at which areas it best fits.
Thank you. Councilor Bresciani.
Thank you for that. I guess the only question, I still am a little bit with the process, but if there's something that comes our way and it doesn't meet this criteria, it doesn't fit in one of the slots as in permitted or as in context, it would be maybe in non-core or prohibited use. What then would be the process for someone coming forward to say, I've got this idea, I would like to maybe bring it forward? Does it come to that committee, or does it come to the city, or does it have to be approved by all the downtown bidnet? Like, what do you see the process being here? To the chair.
Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe my understanding of the process is the intended outcome of the desired committee that should start within 6 months would act in an advisory capacity. So in a scenario where one of the core partners was suggesting an intended use that might be non-core, that they would have the ability to present their decision making or their reasoning to the committee. The committee would have the ability to act in a bit of a mediator or broker capacity, and ultimately, if there was consent to change something from a non-core to a context or a core activity based on the circumstance, they would have the ability to recommend that through your administration and then ultimately to council. But that was my interpretation of it.
Ms. Gibbons, anything to add to that?
No, Tim is right on the mark.
And Ms. Harlech, anything to add?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So that is correct. It would go to the committee, but ultimately, council would have the final decision-making authority over whatever would come forward, because council has the final authority over zoning. This is a framework. It's a guiding document, but ultimately, council would have the final authority, like any other advice. You know, you're getting advice, and then you make the final decisions.
Thank you very much. Councilor Bresciani.
Thank you. Just a couple more here. The SAF fees cost for a developer, that there's 3 positions for the infrastructure. Ms. Harlech, did you indicate that what would be the cost for that coming out of SAF fees?
So I'm going to ask Ms. Harlech to answer this, but I want to direct questions to the delegation then.
Okay, I can wait. I can wait on that one. Sorry, I apologize. I'll wait and I can bring that after. To the, I think that's all I have. Yeah, that's all I have for the delegations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Bresciani. Councilor Shaw, I see that you indicate you'd like to talk. I have no further questions for the delegations unless you have a question for the delegation. If not, I'm going to invite you, if you wish, to put the recommendation on the floor, and then you can ask the administration and any questions and make any comments that you wish.
Thank you.
Sorry, after that lengthy explanation, Councilor Stadnicek indicated that she had a question. So can I come back to you after this, Ms. Shaw? Good, Councilor Stadnicek, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I have a question through you to Ms. Gibbons. So for the yards and the warehouse business improvement district, residential is there. I'm not sure if people are aware that there are already people who live in the area, in the warehouse district. So I'm wondering if you could just expand on what are the needs to attract residential in that area. Because there was a mention of some of the infrastructure needs, the underground infrastructure needs, but are there any other things that need to be done to attract residential living?
Mr. Reid.
It was for Lisa Gibbons, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Gibbons.
That is a great question. There are a number of things that are going to have to evolve as we build our residential numbers in the warehouse district and on the yards. Things like lighting, green space, of course, our high-speed internet infrastructure. There will be improvement to roadways, additional parking, all sorts of things along those lines are going to have to be developed as we build out our residential, which is going to go and support our city center core as a whole. So I think it's an investment that we're excited to see in the future years.
And sidewalks, I believe, too.
Yes, ma'am. Don't forget sidewalks and crosswalks. Okay. I mean, it could go on and on.
Yes. All right. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Stadnicek. Councilor Bresciani, you have one more question for the delegation.
Thank you. Yes, I do. Lisa, through the chair, just in regards to the environmental piece on those rail lines, what has been done for, if that is being considered for residential, what has been done and what more has to be done if residential does go there, and what could the cost be? Through the chair.
Ms. Gibbons.
I think that is likely a better question for city administration the process has been ongoing, and there is federal and provincial funds along with some city investment to make that happen. And as I understand, it is underway, and perhaps not as bad as we may have thought. But I would ask that administration provide the details on that information.
So, Councillor Bresciani, if you could bring that back to the administration, if you wish, in due course.
Okay, I will. And just the last question, I know there has been talk about the Red Sox or a baseball kind of facility, maybe looking at into the yards. Can I ask, have you had an opportunity at all with the warehouse to meet with anybody? Not.
Yeah, we have asked them to present at our upcoming Yards Task Force Committee meeting on April 6th, so we look forward to hearing more from them on that date.
Great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Shaw, you've been very patient. I appreciate it. Any questions for the delegation?
I do. Through the chair, now I'm having a little hard time understanding this, and I'm new to council, so please bear with me. You have your three committees. You have your Real, your Downtown, and your Regina Warehouse. So you guys are all going to come together and make a plan for all this area. My question is why hasn't any of this ever come about before? Why is it taking all of you guys now to join together for something to happen? Through the chair.
So I'll go first to Mr. Reid and then to Ms. Gibbons on this. Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And thank you, Councillor, for the opportunity to provide an answer. I think, to the credit of to Mr. Holden and Ms. Orlek, I think we had an opportunity to come together to talk about how we break down some of the silos that we've been working within. You know, respectful of the categories that we have, we've all often been asked to work within those categories. And I think we recognize that it was quite limiting in how we came together for a greater purpose. So I think, to your question, on our side, we were asked to be very focused and specific to the real grounds. And because of that, it limited our opportunity to perhaps have some of these collaborative discussions that we've had in the past. And I think, to the credit of council for the request, previous council for the request, and this council for allowing it to happen, and the work of administration, I think now we're talking about city center as a whole versus pieces of city center. So I think it's a different time and a different opportunity to converse. Recognize that I appreciate the opportunity as real to participate.
Ms. Gibbons.
I would echo the comments of Mr. Reid and say that we now have a generational opportunity to make a real impact in our city center, regardless of what may have happened or not happened in the past. I think this is a great opportunity that we can seize and really show our city center off to be the great place that it is.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you for the answer. I'm just looking at it as a taxpayer's point of view here. They've been paying for EDs for all three of these organizations, and nothing really has amounted. And now it's like, okay, now we promise you something's really going to happen. So it's really hard for me to swallow this right now. Are you talking, and this is another question through the chair, are you talking about maybe amalgamating all your boards together, or just forming a committee with a select few from each of the committees that we already have, through the chair?
So Ms. Gibbons and then Mr. Reid.
Thank you.
Appreciate the question. We have all worked independently, and for the warehouse bid, we are definitely funded by our members, not through City Council, and have been providing services for many years. It's just now we have this opportunity to develop a large piece of land that before and for many years has sat vacant. This definitely is not an amalgamation, but an opportunity to create an advisory board where we'll each have a voice to sit down and really direct some development in our city center. I don't anticipate this will be a huge cost on the city, but I would ask Mr. Reid to speak to that.
Mr. Reid.
Through the chair, and thank you for the question. I think a couple of things likely add some focus on this. Number one, if you look at the trend lines in terms of city center intensification over the last 10 years, I think through this process, we thought to achieve some of those outcomes, it would take about 957 years at the existing pace. I think on top of that, that's only compounded by the challenges that we see around COVID-19. and our need to compete. Respect the question relative to efficiencies and if there's amalgamation. And just to the question, I think ultimately Real is owned by the City of Regina, and we'll respect whatever action the city chooses. I'm sure our board of directors would have some input on that, but obviously always would be open to opportunities for efficiency. That being said, and I would think building upon Ms. Gibbons' comment, the mandate of some of these organizations are quite different. We would be a municipal corporation. The Taylorfield lands, the SAS Corridor, the yards are all sites that are owned by the City of Regina, and really I think up to decisions of the City Council. The warehouse district and the downtown business improvement district are somewhat unique in the fact that they're membership driven. So on our side, I think we would take whatever direction council felt was reasonable, but I do think that we have mandates that are unique, but certainly open to any opportunities to hit a greater density in our downtown core. So respect the comment, very empathetic to the frustrations. I think we have to be better than we've ever been if we're going to achieve success going forward, and I think this is a positive step in the right direction.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw, further questions?
No, I just want to say that COVID's only been 1 year, so it's kind of, it's frustrating because it says it's been 1 year and I haven't seen a lot happen in the years before. I'm hopeful that this amalgamation might do something and have one photocopier instead of 10 in my short version of us, but we'll wait and see how this all works out, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councillor
Okay,
Mancinelli.
I'm done.
Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you very much. I have one question through the chair. How do infrastructure limitations such as fiber optic internet availability or water availability apply to the uses on the list? Just looking through it, I know there's a couple limitations. Is this to delve out investment in infrastructure to fill the list, or is this really reflective of what can go there right now?
Mr. Reid.
Through the chair, thank you for the opportunity. I think this is purely a strategic document at this time, and I would ask City Administration and Ms. Gibbons to confirm, but I think the purpose of this is if we were to say an aspect on this list was core in any of the various sectors, that would support future capital investment and priority planning around the necessary infrastructure to support what might be intended on those lands.
Perfect.
So through the chair, I think this is really about future planning and strategic decision making, not necessarily an existing state of those lands.
Thank you for that. That answers my question perfectly.
Thank you. Anything to add, Ms. Gibbons?
Oh, I concur with Mr. Reid.
And Ms. Hardick?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I might just add that Mr. Reid is absolutely right. It is a strategic document that looks at the land uses, those processes about infrastructure, and I can talk more about that later. It is about prioritization and those sorts of things, but this is based on what we want to see in the different areas and how we deal with that. And if there is things that are, let's say, non-core that come forward in one area, but it's a good opportunity, it'll go to that advisory committee to have those conversations so that this is a living document that we need to change as the times change and different opportunities come forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Harlick. I have no further questions, so I'd like to thank Mr. Reid and Ms. Gibbons for contributing. You may leave the meeting now, and I'd like to invite a committee member to put the recommendation on the floor.
So moved, Bresciani.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bresciani, you have an opportunity to speak to this or to ask the administration any questions that you'd like answers for.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So just back to my question there that I did ask regarding the SAF fees. The cost of 3 positions that are coming out of the SAF dollars. How does that work? And just tell me the thought behind that and the cost.
Through you, Mr.
Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So the process with SAFs is there's different, there's admin fees. And so right now within the SAF model, we have a number of positions that are attributed and paid out of the SAF fees that attribute to growth related projects. So when we went through the policy, we spoke with industry, and this issue about knowing where our infrastructure capacity constraints are is an issue across the whole city. And so the development industry agreed that administration could add 3 more engineering positions under the admin fees that they would pay for through the admin, through the SAF. And those 3 positions would focus on engineering studies to look at the infrastructure gaps that we're seeing in our infrastructure throughout the city. So it's not just focused on this area. Those positions will also look at greenfield development areas as well. And the value of those 3 positions is approximately $350,000.
And what's the term to the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there is no end date. The industry, the way the SAF model is set up is that growth-related projects, so portions of people's wages that work on growth-related projects are paid through those fees, so that the taxpayers are not paying for those positions. Growth pays for those positions.
So the growth pays for growth model, that, just to be clear, is that what you're saying?
So
through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So again, the model is quite complex. There's the project list and then there's admin fees. So in order to advance growth, those are the positions that can get contributed. And if a person works on a project, only 20 growth-related projects, they only get 25% of their wage paid out of the SAF model. If those weren't paid for and we wanted to do it separate, it would just lower the SAF rate, and then if we want that work done, then it would be done through taxpayers' dollars.
Okay, thank you. So in regards to the environmental piece on the yards lands, to the chair, where are we with that? And if, you know, I keep hearing about high density housing in there and that kind of living, I really struggle with that, and I'm not sure this council has even had an opportunity to look at the plans that were put forth in the yards. But where are we with any of that? Because I've heard it's in the millions of dollars. If we were to go further to put any kind of development in there, I would like clarity on that cost, please, through the chair.
To the administration.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would defer this to Ms. Besdell.
Ms. Besdell.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Bashiani, that's a great question. Actually, part of our environmental remediation work that we're doing right now, we are doing our preliminary quantitative risk assessment, as well as the human health risk assessment. Those 2 reports, or those 2 studies on the site, will actually feed into our corrective action plan. That corrective action plan, right now, with the information that we have, of course, the studies have not been finalized yet, nor has the corrective action plan been finalized, but we are estimating it to be in the neighborhood of approximately $4 million.
At a minimum.
It's like Class D estimate, so there's a lot of swing either way. We will have more information. We have come with some of the testing that we've done. We have unveiled some unknowns on the site, which has added to complexities of remediating.
Okay, thank you for that. Through to administration, will this council be getting a presentation on the kind of the yards lands that was presented to council at one time? It was, and then maybe even the real lands. Is that something that's going to happen here in the near future, through the chair?
To the administration.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are. I'll just answer part of that. We are scheduled to do a presentation to to council on March 31st on the yards. But we do not have any presentation planned on the Riel land. So maybe I will pass that over to Ms. Hauerluck to respond to.
City Manager.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So obviously the Real 2.0, EVRAS 2.0, you've seen that document. On April 7th, there will be a presentation from the Arena Planning Strategy Committee, which will talk about the real lands and in particular the future of the Brant Center. So you will continue to get updates and reports on the EVRAS 2.0 as Mr. Reid and the board continue to advance that work. So the next phase of that is, like I say, April 7th around the Arena Planning Strategy Committee.
Great, thank you for that. The advisory committee that's been talked about here, can I just ask, how will the people be chosen? Who will be, how will that, what will be some criteria around that, putting that advisory committee together through the chair?
Ms. Harlock.
For you, Mr. Chairman. So it'll follow our other committees' process. So the first step is for us to bring forward terms of reference to council for approval within the first 6 months. And then once that's done, it will be up to the city clerk's office to advertise and go through the process for selection. What's outlined on page 20 is what we're recommending to council as the makeup of the advisory committee.
Okay. And the last question that I had is in regards to this being a living document. And I use that word because I've heard that with the OCP. It's a living document, but anytime it becomes exactly what we have to abide by. And I question that some of the land uses, if something came out that is not in this, maybe it's a cricket pitch or something like that. Something that doesn't fit in here. I'd like to know what would be the process of how this would work to get it through this, because this almost becomes in stone. And then you have to go, I understand you have to go through the advisory committee, but if someone is coming in and saying, I'm going to fund, say an arena or a cricket pitch or whatever, and that committee says, no, the process would still be, anything that they would decide on would still come to council. Is that correct, through the chair, for that process?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. So the process would be we don't want to miss any opportunities. So those opportunities would go to the committee. They'd have the discussion, and then a recommendation would come to council. Unlike the OCP, this isn't a statutory document. And so council would take that advice. But even if it was a statutory document, council can look at changing that based on the information and the will of council. So at that time, council would have that decision, even if the advice was not to go that route. Council always has that opportunity based on the information before to override that advisory committee. It's advisory, it's giving advice, but ultimately all decisions lay with council.
Thank you. And this is my last question. In regards to what was put forward here in this center, city center core, was there any communication to the general public in looking at these land uses or these districts of what that would be, that would see, they would kind of have some suggestions or feedback on? Was it ever presented to the public? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we thank you for the question, because we had a lot of conversations about that. So Real 2.0 undertook a large consultation process. So that was a public consultation process, and these land uses align with that. The yards undertook a full consultation process and has an approved concept plan approved by council. And these uses are similar to what was envisioned within that. So Sass Drive corridor, again, it's land uses that are already existing there. And then with respect to Taylor Field, the downtown and the warehouse, again, it's what those areas already have envisioned. So the downtown bid and the warehouse district looked at the uses that are compatible for their areas. So to your question about broader consultation, like generally about this document, no, because it's a framework about a partnership and how we work together.
Okay. And just with that response, I do have one other question. So in regards to the yards land, if we have a presentation come forward for a baseball diamond that's looking at the yards, we have, as you've indicated, approved plan for the yards for a different concept. What would be the outcome there then, with the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I might ask Ms. Bisdell to go through the process, but if there was a proposal that came forward and it meets the plan, then you would move forward with that. I think the yards plan is quite open to allowing a number of different uses, such as those things.
Okay, then that's fine. I don't need anything further. That's all I have. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Zakidniak.
No, sorry, I don't have anything.
No problem. Councillor Shaw. I see, Councillor Shaw, you say your question's been answered. So
It has been, so thank you. Thank you.
And I'll go to Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of comments. I think this is a great initiative. I want to thank administration for bringing together a handful of partners. And for a bit of background, no one said this, but my reading of it is this is partly an exercise of conflict resolution, identifying that there were some tensions in terms of mandate. This aligns interests, and I think it gets people working together where there often wasn't a lot of conversation. I also think that this is a lens through which we can actually assess residential, commercial, and residential development in that area, which is exceptional. It identifies real as a bookend on one end and the downtown and the warehouse on the other. What I'm most appreciative about this is there's actually a land and real estate development aspect bolted into it. So I'm very pleased to see this come forward. I think it's relatively quick, and I look forward to seeing this get off the ground. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any other committee members have questions or comments? Seeing none, I have two quick questions for the administration. The report mentions the Dudney overpass. Not the Dudney overpass, the overpass that connects the rail lands to the center of the city. Is there any comment or any progress on that? Any further information on that? The pedestrian overpass.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, I might ask Ms. Bisdell to answer that question.
Ms. Bisdell.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there is definitely in the neighborhood plan a plan for a pedestrian crossing, and that would be a bridge connecting the downtown to the yards. We don't have any details on that right now, again, for fear of having a bridge to go nowhere. So it is a significant piece of infrastructure, and it is quite costly. We felt that the grant funding was better used towards Dudney Avenue and redeveloping that strip.
Thank you. I have a second question, probably for you, Ms. Vidal. What about the Dudney Avenue project? I noted in the readings the federal money has to be spent by 2028. How far have we advanced with that, and what's the timeline for progress?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. We are currently just working with our internal working group and doing an RFP for release for a consultant to do the concept and design work of Dudney. We are hoping to start construction on Dudney, likely, I guess, depending on the construction season, but later construction season 2022.
Thank you. And do you anticipate any problem being done by 2028 so that all the federal funds will be spent?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we don't. We anticipate this to be a couple-year project with what we know now, which will give us plenty of time to have the project done before 2028.
Thank you. My final question, maybe for the administration actually, throughout the report, there are statistics on intensification downtown. And the charts on intensification are interesting. They start at 2014 and go up to the present, and they tell a pretty bleak picture. However, if you take out 2014, it's a very, very bleak picture indeed. I'm wondering why 2014 was picked as a year for doing averaging, but more importantly, I'm wondering if there's any comment on intensification in the city center core, the administration.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2014 was used because it was the year after the OCP was approved, where the policy for 30%. So that's why 2014 is part of it. It is something that we have an intensification work plan that we're working towards. A report's coming forward to look at incentives. It's a goal. Just like everything in the OCP, it's a goal to achieve. And so we do have things that we're working towards. So since the approval of the OCP, we have been doing a number of things, such as looking at the underutilized land strategy that was approved by council, changing some of our processes. As I indicated, we're going to be bringing a report forward about incentives within this area. So there's been a lot of work, and we're hoping that all of that baseline work and then the additional work that we're doing around the infrastructure requirements will all help to help bring to fruition the ability to see more development take place. Incentives are one way that you can look at moving development or encouraging development that you want to achieve on policies. So it is something that we're continuing to work on.
One of the challenges with downtown intensification is that to a certain extent it competes with greenfield developments in the suburbs. Do you have any ideas on how we can stop driving greenfield development out into the suburbs and drive it instead into the center of the city? My concern is that unless we start to do something, we may start to look like Detroit in 1995. So I think intensification is very important. I just wonder whether you have any comments on that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. It's trying to find that balance between greenfield developments and then finding the intensification. And intensification isn't just always about high density. It's about sensitive development that takes place in our core. So we do have basically our intensification area is everything basically within the Ring Road Center. And that's why it's important as we do our neighborhood plans to find areas for intensification that make sense to neighborhoods. But also how do we build intensification at maybe a larger density within the core, and that's where we have those opportunities for incentives that will help drive that. The phasing plan that other cities have taken phasing plans for greenfield a lot differently than we have, and they're more strict. So that is one tool that council has. But obviously there's consequences with that, especially since that was approved in 2014. Many investments have been made based on that 2014 phasing plan. But there is other tools such as, like I said, incentives, putting in infrastructure in advance, making those investments that make it developer ready, and also looking at our processes, which we are doing right now, to help make it a little bit easier to develop within the city center core.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions or comments from committee members. That being the case, I'd like to ask the clerk to call the roll call vote, please.
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Bresciani, please.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Mole.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Carries unanimously. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. It's coming up to 7 o'clock. We're due a compulsory break at 7:15. This may be a logical time to take a 15-minute break. I'd like to ask committee members if that's their will. I have one nod.
Yes.
In favor, yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Seeing no objection, I'll ask that. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
We need a motion to go into private session.
I'd ask for a motion to go into private session, and following which we'll take a 15-minute break. So could I get a motion to go into private session?
So moved.
Thank you very much. Any objection? Hearing none, I declare the motion carried. We'll take a 15-minute break and we'll resume at 7:15. Thank you very much.